Good evening. I'd like to call the May 11th, 2022 regular Board of Education meeting to order. Mrs. Hutchinson, will you call the roll?
Here. Here.
Here. Here.
Here.
Here.
Here. If you could join me in the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Board members, are there any modifications to the agenda?
Just one thing I wanted to
Yeah.
mention quickly. We added an additional exemption for closed session. So we added matters involving an individual student.
Okay. Any other board members?
I have a request for a modification to the consent agenda. Does that come later? Yep.
Okay. Recognitions and achievements. Dr. Schuler?
Absolutely, thank you. So we are pleased this evening actually to begin the meeting with with two sets of student recognitions. And just by chance, I noticed the other day as I picked up the Illinois School Board Journal, there was a nice article in the journal that talked about the arts. It talked specifically about music and what it is that music and the arts can do for students in terms of how it enriches the educational experience. And just three things that I, again, particularly noted because I think they connect directly to the work that we do in District 200. It specifically cited the importance of music and the arts and how it brings out creativity in students and helps to foster creativity, how it helps them learn to collaborate as they're working on their music, certainly working with not only the adults that are supporting them, but the balance of the ensemble. And then three, the music and the arts are critically important in helping kids to build connections. And we've talked regularly this year about the importance of making sure that students are connected to the school environment, connected to each other. And I think the board has heard a lot of stories this year about extracurricular programs, co-curricular programs, how important they are in the sense of connection that they build. And so I think music and the arts do that. So our two recognitions this evening. First, I want to recognize some students for the visual arts, and this comes from two places. One, each year our PTA Council does a contest. They have an opportunity for students to submit pieces of work through the Reflections program, and three students are specifically recognized as Superintendent Art Award recipients. Separate from that, each of our two high schools does an art show at a different point in the year. Wheaton Warrenville South does theirs in December, kind of in the late winter, and then Wheaton North just did their art show, I think, last week that it was open. And so as a part of both of those art shows, I get the distinct pleasure of picking a piece of artwork to be a Superintendent Art Award recipient. And so if you didn't do it on the way in, I'd strongly encourage you to stop by the 5 easels behind you on the way out, because the 5 pieces of artwork are up and recognized. And so I'd like to start by first recognizing two of our students that are here this evening. I believe we have Emma Fitzpatrick. Emma, are you here? Come on up, Emma, if you wouldn't mind, to the podium. Emma is a 7th grade student at Franklin Middle School that submitted a piece of artwork called Clean Up. And Emma, hang out there for just a second, because I'm going to ask Victoria to come up and join you. Victoria is from Wheaton Warrenville South. Absolutely beautiful pieces of art, and congratulations. I certainly hope that both of you will continue to make art an important part of your educational experience. We have 3 students that couldn't be here this evening: Lindley Grimm, Melissa Hatcher, and Jennifer Ocampo from Wheaton North. But again, one more round of applause for our 2 art award recipients. And if you wouldn't mind, the board would very much love to recognize you. Would you mind coming up to the table? We're just going to ask you to shake hands with each board member so they can congratulate you. And here's the absolute best thing about this recognition. Those 5 pieces of artwork in the back get framed, and I get the pleasure of looking at them for the next year as they hang in our offices at the School Service Center. So congratulations again. We also this evening are recognizing some of our high school students that qualified through ILMEA for All-State. And just a little bit about that experience. To make it all the way to All-State recognition, you have to first be recognized through kind of a regional regional competition. And I hear often that our region, the schools that comprise our region, in and of itself, that's basically an all-state competition, that it is incredibly difficult to even get through kind of at the, I guess, the regional level, but then to move from the regional level and be recognized as one of the top musicians in your particular area for the region, it gives you an opportunity then to join other musicians around the state for a couple of days of not only instruction and an opportunity to learn from some incredible musical clinicians, but a chance to interact with some other students that share the same passion for music. And so we are joined this evening by 4 of our all-state musicians. I believe we had 1, 2, 3, 8, 9 altogether across District 200. And so first I'd like to recognize from Wheaton Warrenville South, Caleb Watson, qualified. Caleb, come on up. If you hang out there for just a second, I'm going to ask you, Caleb was an all-state musician in orchestra. And then we have 3 Wheaton North students that were all-state band musicians. We have Jacob Chang. Come on up. Zachary Larrickers, did I say that right? And Sophie Cho. Again, tremendous accomplishment. We're certainly very, very proud of you, and I'd like to ask the same if you'd come up. All the board members would love to congratulate you in person. I would be remiss if I did not mention, certainly recognize the fact that behind, I think, every student accomplishment is a teacher that's been instrumental in helping to lead and guide that effort. So I do want to extend a congratulations to our music teachers and our art teachers that have helped to create these opportunities as well. One more round of applause for our students as we kept it.
Okay, next up is the President's Report. I only have a couple of things to talk about. Just some celebrations. It's the first time in 2 years we've been able to do some of these things, and so I know that there are some board members that have also had the opportunity to attend. We had the PTA Scholarship Breakfast. What an unbelievable event to celebrate the success of students. That were given scholarships from the PTA Council and from the 4 middle schools and from Jefferson, and it was great to see that event back in person again, and where our students are heading off to. Last week was the Celebrate the Stars from our new 200 Foundation that celebrated, and it was just perfect timing that it was during Staff Appreciation Week, teacher recognition. Teachers were nominated and celebrated from each level, elementary, middle school, high school, and even brought back a retiree. It was great to see that event and honor some really terrific teachers. One of the things you'll notice on the calendar for next year, Mr. Hanlon and I talked with Dr. Schuler about we've been in this building for the last 2 years, and it's time to get back into our schools. And so our regular board meetings will have the opportunity to be held back in schools again. Great way for us to see each of those individual buildings. I know we always love, there's a lot of times students and parents that come and staff that to support those. And so great to see, be able to get back into our buildings. And then just a reminder, there's a lot of things on the calendar between now and the end of the year. If you see some things that you can have an opportunity, there's Explore More Days and Field Days and all kinds of things that are happening in our buildings, and great way to send our students off if you have an opportunity to do so. Dr. Schuler.
Thank you, Mrs. Crabtree. A couple of things I want to highlight under my report this evening. One, thank you for recognizing the Celebrate Our Stars and Staff Appreciation Week last week. That certainly was a great event, fun event, and you're absolutely right. It was great to see that tied into that. I do want to also mention that today is Nurse Appreciation Day, and so we certainly know over the last couple of years that our school nurses have carried a big load in our buildings as they've helped us to navigate the pandemic. We sure are thankful for the incredible work that they do, and I wanted to thank them this evening. In your packets, you have a flyer that Melissa and her team in Education Services have put together. This is actually up on our website as well, but I wanted to just mention it for the board this evening. We've captured all of the opportunities for a summer learning acceleration within the district, so you're going to recognize some of the same opportunities that were available last year in some intensive tutoring programs, our online summer school at the high school level. Our high schools have a whole series of bridge courses that are running again this summer, both a freshman bridge course to support students in reading and math as they transition from middle school to high school. A number of our AP advanced placement classes have bridge programs. We started to develop those as a part of our Inspiring Excellence program that continues to seek opportunities to expand enrollment and opportunity in early college, and so we want to make sure we support that in the right way. Our Day Academy program, which is a credit recovery program during the school year, is going to actually continue to run through this summer to support not only students that were already being served through the Day Academy, but other students that may have a credit recovery need over the summer and can take advantage of that platform. We have this summer, for the first time, some students that are actually taking part in a manufacturing apprenticeship program. So with support of the Regional Office of Education, that is not only a learning opportunity for students in terms of class credit, but it's a paid apprenticeship opportunity, and there's some phenomenal advanced manufacturing facilities around us that have some great career opportunities. And then finally, our extended school year program will continue to run as well. I also noted, as I went on to the two high school sites today, in the summer recreation space, both Wheaton North, Wheaton Warrenville South have a full listing of summer recreation programs, so both sports, some of our club activities we're running, music options, chess, there's theater, there are a lot of opportunities. Those are not just available for high school students, so a number of those programs reach down into the elementary and certainly middle schools, and so I just encourage parents, if you're looking for some of those opportunities this summer, look on both of those high school websites. It's under the high school athletic department is where we host or have all of the summer recreation information, but again, for both of the high schools, 2 pages front and back with all of the opportunities taking place this summer for students to continue to stay engaged, stay connected, and accelerate as we move into next school year. Third thing that I just wanted to mention at last month's board meeting, as I gave what was a tradition of a monthly COVID data report, we mentioned that we were going to close out that monthly report, partially because some of those data points I don't actually have anymore as the reporting got shifted. But I did just want to mention in that space, I want to make sure that we do clearly mention that over the last couple of weeks, we have seen an uptick in COVID case activity within our schools, both on the student side, on the staff side. Julie, Dr. Salagi team, continuing to work really hard as we do any case investigation or space investigation. So we are still tracking case activity. We are still tracking hotspots and putting in play additional supports or mitigations inside individual spaces as appropriate, and we're going to continue to do that. Again, we're holding at a pretty consistent pace. I think last week we saw about 120 student cases, which has definitely been an uptick. And so, again, just the reminder is that virus is still there. We're still continuing to navigate through that. We are continuing to have in place, again, kind of those targeted space options. But again, I appreciate all of the work that our buildings continue to do, right, as they help us navigate through. I think, again, what you heard at the front end of this report tonight is there's a whole lot more activity that's happening both in our schools on the weekends. Wheaton North had their prom just recently. South's got theirs coming up. And so we've had some tremendous opportunities for students to celebrate the end of the school year, and we know that we can continue to do that safely, but we just need to be cognizant of what it is that we're seeing. Last 2 things that I'll just mention. Mrs. Crabtree mentioned tons of activities going on here as we approach the end of the year. I think as I looked at the calendar today, there are 3 or 4 activities going every night at our schools as we're bringing the school year to a close, so please take advantage of that. And then just a reminder that May 28th is graduation day. College of DuPage, truly one of probably the favorite activity that we have an opportunity to be a part of as we celebrate our students and help them transition into the next phase of their learning. So whether you're at graduation or not, please help us celebrate our students in District 200. They all deserve a hearty congratulations as they move to graduation. That's it.
Okay, next up is public comment. In accordance with Board Policy 2.230, members of the public wishing to offer public comment have the opportunity to do so. Public comment sheet was made available until 7 p.m. Board meetings are available for viewing via the live stream district's YouTube channel. As with all public comments, please be aware that it's the board's regular practice to not directly discuss, ask questions, or take action on public comment until the time has been taken to gather adequate information. The board is there to listen. Lack of action or direct response following public comment does not imply any lack of interest in what is being shared. Per Board Policy 2.230, the time allotted for each person to speak during public comment may be shortened. We will not be doing that tonight. You can have the full 3 minutes. To preserve confidentiality, the board and its president request that items relating to personnel or students be provided to the board privately or in writing for consideration in a future closed session if necessary. The board must protect the civility and decorum of the meeting. Please be respectful of the duties of the board, our district leadership team, and the democratic process in your public comment. Please include your name, whether you are a resident of the district. Limit your comments to 3 minutes. Are we using our new timing system? So Mr. Hanlon will be raising his hand at the 3-minute, as we approach that 3-minute mark. Please be factual and courteous and do not include statements that are personally disrespectful or condescending to members of the board or the staff. The first person is Ashley Kadima. Thank you.
Hello. I have a daughter, half-day kindergarten at Carl Sandburg Elementary School. Hello? Hello? Yeah, is that better? Okay. I have a daughter, Olivia. She goes to half-day kindergarten at Carl Sandburg Elementary School. I'm here today talking about an issue about their bathroom policy. They have more than one stall that's allowed at a time in their bathrooms, and I brought this up to the principal, Ms. Bailey, at the beginning of the school year, and she said it wasn't COVID-related why only one kid's allowed in a bathroom at a time, but it's because boys are peeing on the floor. The few times that my daughter Olivia has used the bathroom there, she would scream telling whoever opened the door that they had to leave. My daughter has never had an issue with a bathroom, public, going anywhere. Now she has created this huge anxiety over going to the bathroom at school. My daughter is now holding her bladder because of this. It has now become issues everywhere. She's not drinking any water during school because she doesn't want to use the bathroom. Olivia brought up to us at dinner Saturday, April 23rd, that boys and girls are using each other's bathrooms because they can't hold it, when indeed they can use the bathroom because there is more than one stall. But the teacher has told them to check the opposite sex bathroom and see if it's empty. I'm against this being put in my child's head. I asked her if she thought if boys being in girls' bathroom was okay, and she said yes. I said it is not. She said, but Ms. Martinez said it was okay. I had a meeting with the school Thursday, April 28th, with the principal and the teacher admitted allowing the boys and girls into each other's bathrooms because they were having issues. Both situations are wrong. I asked the principal, Ms. Bailey, what is her plan for Olivia next year for all-day first grade? She said, we'll look at that when that time comes. I didn't like that answer, so she said, well, she can use the nurse's bathroom. So what, Olivia can feel shamed, embarrassed, bullied down the road for using a different bathroom, develop more anxiety than she already has? I don't need her to develop any more issues, especially with her bladder growing, with her growing body, not anyone's kids. I'm here joined with another mom who has a kid also that goes to Carl Sandburg, but I have brought in this up to other parents there in the half days, and they said, oh, my kid hasn't drank any water either, or maybe my kid refused to use the bathroom. So wondering if that's also an issue. But due to the situation that parents aren't being told things, being kept secret, I've lost all my trust with this school, and Olivia will not be returning to Carl Sandburg. I do have emails both from the teacher and principal about things. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Bill Voller. Okay. Thank you. Okay, that concludes our public comment. We're on to consent agenda. Acceptance of gifts to Monroe Middle School Eagle Honor Award Dinner. Approval of resolution of appointment to the DuPage Area Occupational Education System Board of Directors. Appointment of district representative to DuPage West Cook Governing Board. Adoption of the Board of Education meeting calendar for the 2022-2023 school year. Approval of the reciprocal reporting intergovernmental agreement and memorandum of understanding for police and school district interactions between the City of Wheaton and the Board of Education of CUSD200. Approval of the resolutions designating depositories. Approval of license and easement agreement between CUSD200 and Wheaton Development Partners, LLC. Approval of IHSA annual renewal. Approval of snack vending contract renewal. Approval of staff laptop refresh. Approval of elementary student Chromebooks. Approval of networking test servers. Approval of Dell servers and SAN solutions as part of network refresh. Approval of the 2021-2022 Illinois State Board of Education Discipline Improvement Plan template. Approval of bills payable and payroll. Approval of minutes, April 13th, 2022, open and closed. April 27th, 2022, Committee of the Whole, open and closed. And approval to destroy recordings of closed sessions prior to December 2020 is allowable by law. Approval of personnel report to include employment, resignation, retirement, and leave of absence of administrative, certified, classified, and non-union staff. Are there any items board members want removed from the consent agenda? Dr. Yeboah?
I have two.
Okay.
Approval of the reciprocal reporting intergovernmental agreement and memorandum of understanding for police and school district interactions between the City of Wheaton and the Board of Education of CUSD200.
So number 5.
Yeah. And number 14, approval of the 2021-2022 Illinois State Board of Education Discipline Improvement Plan template.
Okay, those will be moved to action. Dr. Schuler?
Yeah, just actually have a couple of 3 exciting introductions. So as part of the personnel report this evening, the board will be approving the appointment of 3 new administrators in the district that we're joined by, actually 4 administrators. I think 3 of them are here this evening. So I want to introduce Catherine De La Rosa, who is going to be the assistant principal at Bauer Elementary School. I can't quite see it from here, Catherine, but please come up. Also pleased this evening to introduce Mr. Bob Cerny, who will be the principal at Whittier Elementary School. And Mr. Kevin Weisenberger, who will be the director of facilities for the district.
Board members, any questions or comments for Dr. Schuler? Okay, hearing none, I ask for a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as presented.
As revised. We pulled 2 off.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
So as revised.
I'm sorry, we pulled off number 5 and number 14.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Long,
Second.
second by Mr. Hanlon. Mrs. Hutchinson, will you call the roll?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, next up is our policy posting consent agenda. The 5 policy numbers are for approval to post the policy, post the public review and comment, revised policy 5.120, revised policy 6.60, revised policy 7.290, revised policy 7.315, new policy 4.165. Are there any items board members want removed from the policy posting consent agenda? Okay, Dr. Schuler?
And no additional information other than these are actually the 5 final policies from the massive edition of press that we went through, and just some exciting news for the policy, HR policy committee and the rest of the board as we're kind of bringing this issue to a close. I just got news yesterday that the new edition of press came out, so we're going to have a new batch of policies to review as well. It's not nearly as long as the previous one from the last legislative session. So again, thank you to the policy committee. I want to mention all of these policies were looked at. There were a few that we held on to because we were making some minor adjustments to in what's presented. And then the last little thing that I'll just mention, it was noted in a couple of the policies that the numbering is a little off in the draft version. That will get cleaned up before it's posted in our manual. Diana does not have the ability to adjust that numbering until she officially submits it, and then press does their magic. So that will get cleaned up. It will not look that way when it gets into our manual. So.
Board members, are there any questions for Dr. Schuler? Okay, hearing none, I ask for a motion and a second to approve the policy posting consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Booten,
I'll second.
second by Mr. Hanlon. Mrs. Hutchinson, will you call the roll?
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Yes. Okay, we have 4 action items now. The first is the acceptance of the 2020-2021 single audit. I see Dr. O'Keefe is heading up to the podium. Dr. Schuler, do you have anything to start with?
I do not. I'm going to let him take it away.
Okay.
Good evening. As a part of your annual audit, there are two major pieces that are completed by Baker Tilly. The first one is the AFR, the Annual Financial Report, and then we have the single audit. Those are really two distinct pieces of audit information that are compiled on an annual basis. The AFR looks at the district as a whole. The single audit looks at our federal programs. So any money coming from the federal government, any dollar amount that's considered revenue coming from the federal government, think of title grants, IDE grants, our National School Lunch Program, those are all federal dollars that flow through and in to the district. Because we're a non-federal entity with, any non-federal entity with $750,000 or more of federal revenues are required on an annual basis to go through the single audit. The single audit does take an extensive amount of time. It's more in depth, and it's actually, there are more specific pieces of information that Baker Tilly looks at. Back in November, they asked, in order for them to get the AFR done in a more timely fashion, if they could set aside the single audit and finish that after the fact. That's the case. Happy to report, no issues whatsoever. Mrs. Murphy and her team do a great job of managing our grants and looking at everything on a federal and local level. So this is just us asking you to accept what it is that Baker Tilly has done, and it's in addition to what you've already accepted from an AFR perspective.
Board members, any comments for Dr. O'Keefe? Okay, thank you, Dr. O'Keefe. Hearing none, I ask for a motion and a second to accept the 2020-2021 single audit as presented by Baker Tilly US LLP. Can I have a motion and a second? Moved by Mr. Long.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Booten. Mrs. Hutchinson, will you please call the roll?
Yes.
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 Yes. Next up is approval of Perkins and Will Middle School Facilities Master Plan Update Proposal. Dr. Schuler?
Yeah, I'm going to hand this one over to Dr. O'Keefe as well, but I just want to mention for the board that in your green packets is our facilities overview document. We've referenced this document at a few different meetings and conversations this year, but this document was developed at the beginning of this year to provide for our community an update on the facilities work that's happened since the 2017 Master Facility Plan. I think as the board is well aware, we've been, I think, as aggressive as we can in continuing to attack our capital improvement projects in the district. We have continued to stay true to the Sherman-Durgis policy that invests a little over $7 million a year in summer capital improvements. We built a new early childhood center. We addressed our secure entry projects. We've addressed some of our high school projects that were included in that plan, including tennis courts and auditorium upgrades at Wheaton Warrenville South and at Wheaton North. And so this item this evening really is our opportunity to come back to one other major bucket of projects that were included in that 2017 plan, that being our middle school projects at Edison, at Monroe, and at Franklin. So that's kind of the context for it. So Dr. O'Keefe, anything you want to add that I didn't highlight from this doc?
The only piece would be this is work that would get done this summer. So Will and Perkins would be back out in our schools and then have a report for us late fall, early winter. The goal is by the end of the year, they think they can get it done before then. So that way we can begin conversations about what those cost updates and any other changes to the middle school plans going forward would look like.
Any questions for Dr. O'Keefe? Mr.
No,
Paulson?
no questions, but just a few comments for the board. First off, I did get a chance to look at this ahead of time. I reviewed the proposal. I think the costs are very reasonable considering it's 3 complete middle schools. I'm comfortable with the proposal as presented. I think it gives us a great opportunity to refresh our look at the middle schools. It's been, 6 years or so since then. A lot's changed. We've got a new strategic plan coming. Probably more relevantly is the Portrait of a Graduate. And we have an opportunity to start thinking about how that Portrait of a Graduate might influence space and the student experience. So I think that's an important opportunity to relook at relook at the buildings. I also think it's, with the potential funding opportunities ahead of us, I think it's good to look at that as well. And then one of the things that I'm going to be looking forward into how the plan is revised is, how the master plan might be able to be developed in different pieces, depending on how the funding might become available, as opposed to just one big full plan. The idea of creating an updated master plan that can be put together in different increments that would not do the entire program, but necessarily look at what might be available to us. So I'm pretty comfortable with I'm very comfortable with the proposal and would recommend.
Any other questions or comments?
So real quick, going back to that 2017 plan, it was just here's all the things infrastructure things we kind of need to do, right? And I'm just based on what I read in the proposal and what Brad was commenting on, there's opportunities to do things that align to Porch River Graduate and other things that help our students grow, right? And so what I would like to be able to do is kind of cafeteria style those things, and so the kind of the pure infrastructure plays that we just got to do, and then those other things that are additive to a learning experience. So I'd like to just find a way to separate those somehow.
Yeah, and I guess two things. One, Shanley, I think fair question. One, the 2017 plan was not just capital. So at the middle school level, right, there were science improvements. There was a performing arts space at Monroe. There were some targeted areas within each of the schools. I think one of the things we found back in 2017, and I think we'll find again, is that there are some things that are just like purely capital, right? You address it. It's not going to necessarily significantly impact an instructional space. There are some things, though, that as you're in addressing, so there are capital improvements needed in our science labs, right? Mr. Robinson would tell you that even if we did not update the space at all, we've got a lot of infrastructure stuff that we would have to tackle. So it's not going to be entirely possible to decouple everything, because there are some spaces we're going to simultaneously renovate while addressing a capital piece. But I think we tried to do that so you have some way to see kind of the cost breakout on
Great,
that.
thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Sorry, Chris, just a little confirmation. I remember back in 2017, each middle school had more than one plan that they had in mind. So will it be broken out? Because there was kind of like the dream plan, and then like what was absolutely needed, and then something in between. Will the quotes be broken out that we can pick and choose? I guess I think that's what you're asking, but I just want to make sure.
Yeah, we did. So we did look at a few options. We did end up settling on an option at each of the schools that we progressed forward as part of the referendum that we had advanced to the community. So we did kind of get to a solution, but the process of getting to the solution looked at a couple of different iterations. I think this process will be very similar. That makes sense? So I don't know that it'll necessarily be like option one, option two, sort of pick either, but I think kind of understanding, at a very base level, we know we have to do this. We really like to address these opportunities, for learning, and that could look like kind of this range of options. Because I think the other thing, last little piece that I'll mention, is that especially at Franklin was probably the most complicated project, because when you went into one space to address it, in order to address it, you started impacting other spaces, and so there was kind of like it was like the domino game where you knock down one domino and it starts to kind of trickle to others. So in some cases, you can kind of pick and choose elements, but then when you start to decouple them, it gets a little more complicated. But all that to say, we're not going to just give you one option and say this is it. We'll have an opportunity to work through that, and really the Perkins and Will work is just going to bring forward the options that we can continue to work off of. So It does not necessarily mean every decision is made by winter of next year. It just means that those options are updated, so then we can start to look at the cost elements, start to look at how we potentially fund those options, and that's where some of those variables will come together.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Hearing none, I ask for a motion and a second to approve the middle school facilities plan update proposal as presented.
I move.
Moved by Mr. Paulson.
Second.
Is that Mrs. Booten?
Yeah.
Second by Mrs. Booten. Mrs. Hutchinson, will you please call the roll?
Yes.
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 Yes. Next up is approval of the reciprocal reporting intergovernmental agreement and memorandum of understanding for police and school district interactions between the City of Wheaton and the Board of Education of CUSD200. Dr. Schuler?
Yeah, just I'll make two quick comments on this item. It's been pulled out. So we updated the reciprocal reporting agreement. Really, two things that drove our need to provide that update. One is the development of body-worn cameras that actually is kind of happening in lots of police departments, and so we wanted to add language to our agreement that really articulates when and how would body-worn cameras be used inside of our schools by our SROs. Second issue that we did want to address, and it was a small language change, is that Dr. Kyle and his team have very, I don't want to say very regularly, I don't want to mislead this, but it happens a fair amount that an issue comes up in the middle of the night, something perhaps that was posted, written on social media, that does require us to work with the police department to investigate before the morning, so that we have full confidence in our ability to safely open schools in the morning. And there have been one or two instances where if police cannot get a hold of one of our administrators in the middle of the night, they have a difficult time getting simple directory information so that they can do their investigation. And so we did add language that just allows for them to have a means to access that directory information. And again, having that is to our benefit and to the police department benefit, in that it avoids situations in the morning where we have perhaps either a rumored threat or an active threat that hasn't been able to be resolved in time for the start of school. So those are really the two drivers in this. I think I was asked a question, Mrs. Booten had just asked a question earlier today that, when did the reporting agreement and the SROs come into place in our schools? It was in 1996 that we first introduced the SROs and worked on some version of this reporting agreement. So that's it in terms of background.
Questions or comments for Dr. Schuler?
I have several.
Go ahead, Dr. Ewell.
So I have several concerns with this document, and I'll name them as briefly as I can. One is its location on the consent agenda item. I just want to note that my concern with that assumes that something as significant as how we interact with the police in our schools is considered on par with some of these consent agenda items, and I think we would reconsider the significance of a document like this, even though it's not new. I would like to see more discussion every time we engage the topic of police in our schools. My second concern with the document is that it's 14 pages long and very difficult to understand, even after several reads, what exactly this authorizes the police in the city of Wheaton or our schools to do or not do. I think this is an example of something that if one's children are not likely to be involved, they may not be concerned with the lack of clear readability of the document. But if you have children who are highly likely to find themselves in a police encounter in schools, this document is significant. So I think in order to be considerate of the very different experiences of kids and families in our districts, we need to create a document that is understandable and very clear in terms of how we communicate to parents or anyone who reads this what exactly these partnerships with the police can or cannot do. As a side, again, I'm very clear that we're not approving the idea of having cops in schools. We're simply approving the addition, namely the body cameras. But I think it's also important to note that for those in the community who are concerned with money, they're very costly. They do come at a somewhat large expense to our district. I'm not saying necessarily that that means that we shouldn't have them. I think it's important to note that there's a variety of other options for making sure that we keep our kids safe. Finally, that leads me to the idea of narratives and the history of particular narratives being used to drive decisions like this forward without the kind of important discussion that I think can happen at the board table. A particular narrative, of course, being safety, one that nobody can disagree with publicly without probably questions, and rightly so. So with that, I do prioritize the kinds of incidences that Jeff said this benefits, and those are, emergencies, things that happen in the evening hours, and those are the kinds of situations nobody would ever wish to happen at our schools. So with that, I specifically would like to state that I disagree with the possibility of body-worn cameras in schools. I know that's coming from the state. But while there can be benefits of capturing, data to look at, I think there's a possibility of hyper-surveillance of our children and the possibility, even though the document reads otherwise, of using data disproportionately to affect some kids more than others. Finally, I simply request of the district a couple of quick things. As we engage documents like this, we find opportunities for discussion around the history of policing, particularly following emancipation as a means to control newly freed, formerly enslaved people. That we have a discussion around the possibility of manufactured ideas about black and brown bodies, particularly children, as deviant, dangerous, subhuman, and unworthy of the protection of rights of white children. I'm asking that we consider the connection between policing and discipline practices in schools, namely the way authority figures interact with children in these spaces. And finally, that we reconsider the possibility of revenue generation for the state or for the city coming from schools via ticketing. In that connection, seeing the way policing interacts with mass incarceration, recognizing there's 60,000 children incarcerated in our nation every day and over 2 million people. And those are some of the reasons that I have deep concerns with this document, but more so with the assumption that this document is ideal or appropriate for accomplishing the mission and vision of our district.
Any other board members have questions or comments?
I have a few. Mary, I hear your point on the hyper-surveillance of kids. But the thing is, we have cameras all over our schools right now. And so I just see that as, the way I read this is that if the police officer, and please correct me if I'm wrong, interacts with a student, that camera will be turned on to record that particular incident. But I guess the surveillance part of it, I mean, we have cameras all over our high schools and our middle schools, so I'm not sure they're already highly surveilled, so to speak. So I don't know if that, I hear that concern, but I feel like that's already happening within our schools,
I think that's a great question, and I think I would wonder then, who does that data belong to, and what can it be used for in the court of law?
The body camera?
Yeah, versus the cameras that are around schools.
We own our cameras,
Yeah.
they own their cameras.
Right.
So we do not have access to the data off of the body-worn camera unless that data becomes a part of a student discipline issue. So if the incident itself is a part of a student discipline issue, then it becomes a student record in the same way that any other.
But the police do.
What's that?
The police have that.
Correct.
That's their data. So that's
Yeah.
the difference.
Yeah, no, and that's a fair point. And I know I asked this via email, but I just wanted to ask here too, in section 1.3D, that says final discretion regarding whether to charge an individual with an ordinance, criminal, or traffic violation lies with the SRO, the city, and/or DuPage County State's Attorney Office. And is that by law? I mean, is that, that just bothers me a little bit, that we can't.
So in this way, Susan, when our buildings ultimately have the authority to decide whether they engage the police or not, right? Police do not come on their own. So whether an SRO is in the building or it's a building without an SRO, it's ultimately our staff that are deciding to call the police. Once they bring police into the issue, then ultimately the disposition of that situation is going to belong with the police officer that was called in to play. That's not to say that we are not, as a building or as a staff, going to be a part of that discussion or that process, but once we've engaged the police, ultimately the disposition of that situation is going to rest with the authority that we brought in. The decision on whether or not charges are ultimately pursued after it's been through the police are going to rest with the discussion between the police officer and the state's attorney that ultimately is deciding if charges are filed. So, but again, I want to clearly say we have a point of control, and that's in our decision on whether or not a situation has risen to a level that authorities are needed.
Okay.
99.9% of the circumstances that take place inside of our schools do not. Our staff handles those circumstances, those issues through our discipline procedures, not through the regular engagement of a police officer.
Okay, thank you for that. That was something actually I didn't quite understand in the email, that, so it's if we engage the police, it's not that if an SRO in a school sees, because he just happens
Correct.
to be there, that we're handling a situation, the police cannot insert themselves.
Correct.
If we have not said, hey, we would like to engage you. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, that makes me feel a little bit, I understand that better.
But Susan, just
now.
to add, and Jeff said this as well, we should also remember that once the police are engaged, then we have no authority to say, so for example, if a kid gets in a little scuffle with another kid, a cell phone falls to the floor and breaks, the kid reports to the principal, this kid pushed me and my cell phone is broken, the cops come, can arrest the child, assuming the principal directed the SRO into that engagement, then they take it from there and there's nothing the principal can do. The principal can say, hold on. That's a bit excessive, and that happens often.
In our schools, Mary, I mean, I'm just trying to temper the language, right? Because you're saying an arrest is going to happen, and I just don't.
Not gonna happen. I was talking about a particular incident that is what happened. So I'm saying, yes, we have to invite the police engagement, but I just want to make it clear to the public that once we do, the school has no authority to say what happens after that. And that's a deep concern of mine.
Right, and I hear that, but according to Dr. Schuler, we're talking a very small percentage of the time we're engaging the police, which is why I had asked the question about how many of those incidences involved an SRO. Like, are we involving an SRO a disproportionate amount of times in our, that example that you just gave, is that something that's actually happened in our schools? Or is that, was that just something you just
It was
made
in
up?
another neighboring district.
Okay. I think that's something that we as a board need to monitor, how often I did some reading on the national issue of SROs, and I know that there is an issue there. I mean, the data clearly shows that, but I also try to, sitting in this seat, we're talking about our district here and what's happening in our district, and is there a problem that we need to address? And I think that's something that we as a board need to keep a close eye on, and are given that data. I know the district is making a concerted effort to really look at that data and to correct issues where they exist.
Yep.
And so I want to be aware of the larger issue, but then also understand what my role is in the seat and looking at our particular district and how SROs are being used.
I will share, just from the discipline standpoint, sorry, Charlie.
Oh, God.
It's loud. No, I felt like Will Ferrell on The Office there, sorry. I'll move the mic. I will share, one of the things we added to all of our referrals at middle and high school is police referral on there to track how many times we do utilize the police, not because of this discussion, but because we want to be able to monitor that. So that is something that we've implemented this year, and we have a committee that at the end of the year will look and see, like, when are we using it, when are we not. And then I will just echo what Dr. Schuler said, and I work with Carroll Stream, I work with Winfield, I work with Warrenville, and I work with Wheaton police departments, and I will say they work with us in conjunction. There are times when, if it's a felony, they don't have any choice but to move it past state's attorney. And it depends on whether those charges are going to happen or not. But I found in my 4 years working with all four police departments, they've worked with us even when we call them in. There's times that once they come, something happens. There are other things that are going to happen, but in between there, they do work with us. So I just wanted to share that because I work probably closely, the most intimate with all of our police departments that service CUSD200.
Any other questions or comments?
I just want to highlight, can I just highlight one more thing? Because I feel like there's a negative spin on SROs in our school, and I just want to mention a positive use of this. I'm not going to make this very, very general, obviously, for privacy reasons, but as you all know, we're all mandatory reporters. Something came to me late at night. One night, I forwarded it to Dr. Schuler. He did whatever he does on his end, and within an hour, the police had checked on this situation in a positive way, and said everything is okay. And so I just kind of want to highlight that this does work for different reasons for the actual safety of our students, and in a positive way. So I just think that's important to highlight too, that there are a lot of positive things that come out of this too. But I hear you, and there are some issues too. But I just thought that was important to say too.
I agree. So I just want to make clear this is the kind of discussion that I think is needed to be able to approve a document of this weight. And again, the connection from within our district to neighboring districts to the past, present, and future. It's the root causes. It's the ideas. And if we continue to use ideas from the past without thinking about them or asking difficult questions about what are those ideas, what's the subtext going on in policing and surveillance and how people thrive, those are the questions I think we need to continually revisit. We can revisit them and say, okay, we've talked about these things. Here's how we're addressing them. It's those conversations that I think make sure we're not continuing patterns that have really damaging impacts on some people.
So I appreciate Mary wanting to have a conversation about it. I'm pulling it off the consent agenda, but I also don't think it's an indication if it's less important or not. Just do we want to have discussion or not? So I appreciate that. And I support you. You know that we debate a lot, right? But we also see differently on this one. And from the community perspective, I strongly support SROs in our schools. I strongly support the agreement. I think it's important. And it's okay that we disagree on that, right? But I want that to be said tonight too, because I don't want anyone in our community to think that we think less of the SROs, right? You're just having debate and discussion about an important document. So I appreciate that.
Mrs. Blattner, I see you have.
I had a quick question. So are there certain incidents that require us to contact the police? And my question is not based so much with the SROs. There was an incident earlier this school year where an employee of a contracted service, that incident came up, and I think I questioned at the time, trying to maintain confidentiality. Like, are we required to call the police in for certain, like, or is that?
There are. If you look at the agreement, there are certain things identified in the agreement where we are required to reciprocally report incidents around drugs or some that are very specifically identified. I think the situation you're talking about, we chose to make that report. So again, there are definitely some things that are identified, but then I think there are other things that happen in our schools where our administrator has made a decision that it is a legal issue, and we need to engage authorities in helping us to navigate through that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? I have one that I'd just like to share, and I'm glad, Mary, you brought up perspective. I go back to my youngest senior year at Wheaton North. The SRO would be spending time at lunch getting to know kids and trying to make connections, and I think that's important as well for our students and as well as for our police department to start connecting with youth at that age and having conversations. And she said sometimes he'd come and sit at the table with them while they ate, and I love that opportunity. He bought a T-shirt for Special Olympics and came to the Special Olympics event then, and just was trying to engage within the community. And I think that's also something, as we are moving forward, that's I think an important piece for students, for our community, for our police department as well. So I wanted to highlight, as Mrs. Booten did, I thought a positive that has come out from having them there as well. Okay, so I need to have a motion and a second for approval of the reciprocal reporting intergovernmental agreement, memorandum of understanding for police and school district interactions between the City of Wheaton, Board of Education of CUSD200. May I have a motion and a second? Mr. Hanlon? Second?
Second.
Mr. Paulson, Mrs. Hutchinson, will you call the roll?
Yes.
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 No.
Yes. Okay, motion passes. Next up is the approval of the 2021-2022 Illinois State Board of Education Discipline Improvement Plan template. Dr. Schuler.
Yeah, just a little bit of background on that, as I think we previously shared with the board. District 200 was identified a number of years ago in having disproportionality in our exclusionary discipline. That actually applied in two separate contexts. One, just overall student population, but then specifically inside of our special education program. And so as a result of that, and again, so the two ways that the state tracks this. One, they track the districts that have the highest percentages of exclusionary discipline. We are nowhere near that list. We actually have very low rates of exclusionary discipline across the district. Where we got flagged as a district is that as you look at the percentage of exclusionary discipline for our Caucasian students versus our African American Hispanic students, we see a higher rate of disproportionality. Once you are on the list, you need to be off of that list for 3 consecutive years before you're officially off of the list. Last year, we were not on that list, so we started to address this problem kind of right in the early phases of the pandemic. Last year, we didn't have a lot of exclusionary discipline. I'll mention, I think the board is aware we haven't actually had an expulsion in this school year or through last school year as well. So this is applying specifically to suspension data. Dr. Kyle previously reported the strategies that we put in place to address it. We put some new resources in alternate to exclusion or suspension options. Certainly there are huge components within our SEL plan focused on connectedness and how we make sure we connect with students. There have been some training opportunities that Dr. Kyle articulated through the strategy is the use of de-escalation strategies, but that actually is a little deeper than just that simple training statement in terms of how we're really focused on kind of root cause of the relationship to help to avoid. So the plan that is in front of you this evening, it is a requirement that the board formally approve the plan so that we can update and report it to ISB as we're required to do by June 1st of each year. But I don't think there's anything in this plan that's new information. We had discussed with the board these strategies at the front end of this year with a number of our work plans. So that's a little bit of background.
Questions or comments for Dr. Schuler? Dr. Yeboah, you pulled it off. I'm just curious.
I do. Yes, I do have comments. Thank you. So what's interesting about these two agenda items is my comments for the one are the same as the comments for the second largely, and that is a consideration of those broader historic and ongoing ideas that continue to inform how we think about children and about behavior and about discipline. And so my main concern or question, to be fair, about this template or this plan is it seeks to address racial disparities. And this is just a very practical example of how typically unintentionally these narratives can be perpetuated, because as the document currently reads, without careful consideration, you may imply that student behavior or misbehavior needs to be either disrupted earlier or handled differently, and so on. And so what then you would assume then, if there's a racial disparity in those occurrences, it means there's a racial difference in how black and brown kids behave versus how white kids behave. And so that's not said anywhere. We don't say we believe that black and brown kids behave more badly than white kids, and yet we've said that the reason the numbers are off is because they behave more badly more frequently. And so to be concise, my challenge here, my question is, if we were to really peel back those layers and look at the root causes that Dr. Schuler is calling us to, we'd have to say, do we really believe that a color of one's skin produces some sort of misbehavior? Well, that's from those ideas that have been manufactured in the past. So I'm simply asking that this document be re-looked at and reconsidered to say, is there anything else going on in discipline referrals or in the way that teachers or administrators view children, and can there be an explicit address of race and racism in wondering why there's a racial disparity? That's what I'm asking the administrator team to consider, whether if you're going to look at a race-based disparity, there should be some clear, explicit explanation of what the race part has to do with it. How does that come in? And I didn't see it in the document, but I know that these discussions are happening, and I just think this would be an appropriate place to locate some of that deep, reflective work that our district is doing around teacher training, going back to Chris's work, and so on.
Dr. Kyle, you want to? Oh, sorry. No, I was just going to ask Dr. It seemed a question answer. So, you want to just address some of the deeper dive work that I think is referenced in the document itself and some of the work you're doing with buildings?
Yeah, so when we started this 3 years ago, we were flagged, like Dr. Schuler said, for two reasons. So as a district, we looked at a number of trainings that we've been working on in the last 3 years. This year, we added CPI training, which is de-escalation training. We did notice that a lot of our number one areas were classrooms. So this year, looking at the data, the good news is it's not as much in the classrooms. It's changed locations. So we're looking at this discipline all the time, and we are trying to figure out, are there patterns? Are there students that, I'll just give an example. We're on our third year of getting off the list with African-American students with disabilities. And what we did is we did a deep data dive, and we looked at the students that were suspended, that were special ed and African American. We looked at things like where they were on the birth order. What's the socioeconomic status? Where do they live? How long was it before they entered the school system and they got their first referral for low-level things like tardies? And then when did they get their first suspension? How many months do we have to make sure that we're proactive with students? So the schools, the good news is that we're not, as an entire district, disproportionate, but now myself and Julie O, we're working with 2 or 3 buildings to really do a deep data dive like we did with the first flag that we had, and we're looking at trends. When is it happening? Where is it happening? Who are the students? How can we be proactive? How can we bring them in before school starts? How can we connect with them when school starts? How do we make positive connections before it's too late, right? We know when we dug deep with the first group of students that we looked at, we found that, it was like basically you had 4 months before a suspension. So you got 4 months to make good connections with kids. Each building has a different makeup, a different group of students. So this isn't like widgets where we could just say this is what we're going to do and it's going to work everywhere. But what we're doing right now, and we're working with 2 buildings in particular, is we're meeting with them, their disciplinary team, and looking at the students and trying to find what trends are we seeing and how we can improve next year and years beyond. Obviously this year, I told the board this, I think about 6 months ago, for as great a discipline we had last year, it seems like kids came to school this year and it's like we caught up, right? Kids are back. So we're working on different strategies, different proactive approaches at both buildings to try and get off this list. That's our goal. Dr. Schuler, that's kind of where we're at the conclusion of this school year. I mentioned it through the last conversation. Our referrals didn't have police referral, just on the referral, easy X, right? Just to know. That's one of the things we're going to be looking at as well. Looking at how many times have we used police, why. We have a number of things we're going to do. I did lay it out in there. We also have the additional supports at middle school and high school that should help us work proactively with students and reactively, but that should help us be able to use students in buildings and not send them home, which is exclusionary. So we're really working on a number of different things, and we've seen success, and we believe we'll have success with this program, but it's very personal to each building.
So just a quick follow-up. So everything I heard you describe is really good work. We know that. We've talked often. But what seems to be missing then, it seems again that we're talking about kids misbehaving. And that's true. That's a reality. But I think what might be missing even from this document that the state is asking, to see would be, is there anything else going on? And if we look at it closely and say our teachers carry no more implicit bias, all the racist ideas of the past are gone, they were eliminated some time ago, and they're gone. But no mention of the possibility of implicit bias or other factors driving disciplinary disparities, I think omits a big area that has contributed and continues to contribute in the aggregate to these disparities. I didn't come up with that. That's what ample research demonstrates. So I'm simply saying everything you said, and there's another big piece, and that is racism. That I think should at least be mentioned or considered, how we're addressing the possibility of racist ideas playing out in our schools via disciplinary measures.
So were you done? Okay. One thing that I think is really interesting is if you open the improvement plan and click into the links, you can actually see the data, right? I think that's fascinating. I think everyone should do it, frankly, in the community. It's very interesting, I think. But secondly, I'm asking this because I want to understand, not because I don't want to dismiss you, right? I want to understand. Yep. So when I read it with my lens, my experience set, the list, if you will, is about disproportionality, right? And so we're putting the plan together as a requirement to address disproportionality. I think, and this might be what you're saying, but I want to clarify, there are so many other good things we're doing in terms of connectedness and other things that while this may address disproportionality, I think it actually is a plan for all students, right? And our discipline. I think it's fantastic, right? If we can de-escalate, we can find different ways to connect, find different ways to address behavioral and look for patterns, as Charlie said, going way back when what were the first, kind of incidents of this, and could we have seen it a little while ago, right? I think that is all fantastic. And I think it's really, really powerful for our district. What I think I hear you saying that I want to challenge is it doesn't go far enough in putting a race wrapper around it, right? Which I would disagree with, because I think it has its value with our entire population, whether it's socioeconomic, race, go down the whole list of lenses we can look through, right? And I think sometimes we get wrapped up, our community gets polarized, because we start talking about race, but I think there's so much good in here. That's what I'm trying to emphasize. So I think we're saying the same thing, but I don't want to dismiss what you're saying.
I think it's fantastic. There's no question. I think it's a wonderful analysis. I'm glad that it's required by the state. I think Charlie does phenomenal work, and Chris and all other administrators, in even reducing these kinds of problems from the start. I'm simply saying that our schools have specifically, too, been identified as racial disparities. We're not talking about gender right now. Obviously, there's intersectionality with, poor black, boys and disabilities and other factors. We know that. But this document seeks to address why there's a racial disparity. That's why I'm bringing it up. So there's a specificity to this document that I think is not being addressed as fully as we're capable of.
Okay.
Thank you. Question or comment / concern. We've talked about these topics a lot, so you know my views, but I'm a little concerned about wanting to draw in implicit bias, because that's like we're accusing our staff or our teachers of being racist. It's kind of what I hear to some degree, and how can we do that generically and not specifically? So I struggle with putting that kind of language in here without solid ground or evidence that we have that issue. I'm not denying that we could have that issue, but do we have that issue? So I'm a little concerned about that.
Yeah, another side to that would be we have no problem claiming that black and brown children misbehave more often, and we didn't have any qualms with that. So that's equally hurtful to some people. You see what I'm saying? So we're addressing something that's very painful. It's very difficult. Nobody in this room likes disciplining children.
So, and I hear you, but what I see is the data of discipline that's disproportionate. So that's a fact.
Yep.
But then, the bias part of it or the racism part of it is kind of an assumption. So I hear what you're saying, but I don't know if I can get that. I'm not there yet.
So at a minimum, I'm asking us to ask, why is it that it's a racial disparity? And if we jump too quickly that it's a racial disparity because black and brown kids misbehave more often, we'd have to say, what about the color of one's skin causes misbehavior more frequently? I'm simply asking, I'm curious. Why? Why could that ever happen? We know there's more to the story. There's also more to the story on class, how many times you move, family structure. We know this. I'm just asking, peel back another layer, dig a little deeper, look at historic context, look at our nation. These are the kinds of conversations administrators should be having so that teachers can be well equipped to teach the children in their classroom. I'm not talking about calling anybody racist if that hurts anyone's feeling. I'm talking about children and prioritizing their education and their health and well-being. And if it steps on a few toes, I believe we can handle it. And this document, I believe, is not addressing the question if we're afraid to ask questions about ourselves and our educators with courage to be able to handle that. I would agree that it's painful, but we can't not ask the question of whether implicit bias is showing up in a document that's asking what is going to be done about these race-based based disparities.
Yeah, so what you just said, I interpret a little different than what I understood you to say the first time. You're asking, we should be talking about why is it happening? And I was interpreting your original comments to say it's happening because we have implicit bias. And I think we have to ask why, and, so that's where that's the line I was having trouble with. And what you just said was was less along the lines of implicit.
That's fine, and I'm okay with that. But the possibility of implicit bias would, or the impossibility of it as a starting hypothesis would have to require that we erase the entire history of our nation and just start from ground zero like we popped up out of nowhere. So there is ample data that could lead, if you follow the dots, to the possibility of any human being thinking differently about black kids and brown kids and white kids. There's lots and lots and lots of data that shows that. Lots. That is, there's a lot of data. And the problem is, if you try to point it, is this what happens? The dots are sometimes difficult to identify. So at a minimum, you'd say somehow this is happening and we need to ask different questions about why, while we continue to de-escalate and do all the other connections and everything else that we're doing wonderful work around. Is that fair?
Yep.
But is the document, the lens of the document is defined by the requirement of the state and the data that was pulled, right?
Right.
If we pulled data that had religion or socioeconomic status or pick some other lens,
Any
right?
other- yep.
The document would have a totally different tone to it, right? So is that, what I'm trying to understand is, are you saying it should, our strategy should be broader than just this document? To me, this document is just addressing a state requirement. There's an important piece of this document, don't get me wrong, but the strategies are broader and they're richer than just the single lens. So is that what you're saying?
Yes, so going back to the requirements by the state, we actually, as Dr. Schuler said, actually, I believe, don't have an exclusionary discipline problem. We have a racial disparity problem. So that's exactly what I'm saying. The broad work is good. I have no problems with it. I'm just saying this document exists to address the specificity of race. It just is. It's a fact. That's what they want. So I'm just saying, let's do that really, really well.
Okay. Thanks.
Other questions?
We do implicit bias training with our teachers? No?
We did last year. We did training with our staff last year.
Okay. So could including that fact in this document, because we have done that training, and so are you saying that should be part of this document too? Or are you saying we have not done the work?
Oh, we have.
And I know there's a lot of work. There's always work to do. But I think is the fact that all that work that we've done is not reflected in this document.
Correct.
Any other questions or
I
comments?
just have one quick comment, kind of off subject, but not really for this template, but I noted a comment in there about the majority of discipline violations happen in September and October. This is a consistent theme I've heard from other school districts as kids try to learn how to be back in school. I'm very interested in whenever the next report is, we see that trend from the start of the year through the end of the year. I think that would be very telling.
We can do that.
Other questions or comments? Okay, hearing none, I ask for a motion and a second for the approval of the 2021-2022 Illinois State Board of Education Discipline Improvement Plan template.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Paulson,
Second?
second by Mrs. Blattner. Mrs. Hutchinson, will you call the roll?
Yes.
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 No.
Yes. Okay, motion passes. Next up is oral reports, Department of Innovation and Technology, Innovation Update. I see Mr. Spencer's walking up there.
Good evening, Board of Education. Thank you for allowing me to be up here again. You know, last time I was up here speaking with you, we covered one specific half of the Department of Innovation and Technology, and that was kind of what we call the boxes and wires or stuff side of the department. Tonight, what I want to do is walk you through an update on the work that we've done on the innovation side of things, more instructionally focused, classroom focused this year. So just to remind the board about specific goals and priorities that were set out specifically as they related to our now sunsetting Vision 2022. So the three main areas of tonight's presentation are going to cover how we in the Department of Innovation and Technology have supported modern literacy skills for students, how we've started to support Portrait of a Graduate and its role in innovation, and then how we've used the Future of Instruction and Technology, or FIT framework, to support an innovative one-to-one environment. So a little bit of context here about what we mean when we use the term modern literacies. So when we think of the word literacy, we think traditionally of how students understand written text, reading, right? However, we see a growing need for other types of literacies that students need to practice. So we call these modern literacies. Some of those examples of modern literacies, first, an example would be media literacy. So when we talk about media literacy, it's the skill of trying to interpret information through different modes of presentation. So students no longer are just receiving information in the traditional textbook format, but in fact are receiving information through video, through podcasts, and now importantly, social media, right? The number one location that students get information now is through YouTube. So the ability to get information from video is very important. Related to media literacy is information literacy. Knowing that information is coming from all these different modes, video, social media, podcasts, textbooks, websites, students also need to practice how to sift all that information out. How to determine what good information is from bad information, but then also know where to go to get accurate information themselves, knowing that there's so much to sift through. So those are two big literacies that we've worked on through our department. Both of those literacies also are connected and support what I have been mentioning lately, digital leadership. So just a reminder that digital leadership is a combination of our traditional digital citizenship, good behavior, safety while online, partnered with this new practice of modern literacy, of knowing that students find themselves in digital environments more and more, how they present themselves while they're in those digital environments. So we practice these skills of, for instance, how to have civil discourse while online, right? We have spent a lot of time teaching students how to speak in front of others, how to have civil conversation face-to-face, but now we know they do a lot of that interaction online, whether it be through gaming, message boards, so on and so forth. You lose a lot of the kind of tone and other supplemental body language things when you're in that digital environment. So that skill of how you still maintain civil discourse is really important for students to practice. And that is very connected to our digital leadership efforts. So having said that, some of the work that we've done to support those modern literacy skills for students is through a new curricular mandate starting next year in the state of Illinois, all high school students have to be exposed to a unit of study that covers media literacy. And in fact, what we've done is we've sat down with key members of both high schools and have come up with a unit of study on media literacy that also incorporates a lot of information literacy as well. So starting next year, that unit of study will come through sophomore English. We've also, in our digital leadership efforts, have assisted Wheaton Police Department to gather resources on digital citizenship as part of their community outreach. They, this year in particular, and even before, have tried to seek ways to partner with us in what role they could serve in helping us support our efforts in keeping students safe. And we've really identified that the digital citizenship part, the online safety portion of digital leadership is a good area that we could partner with them. So we'll continue to look for opportunities to partner with them next year as well. The next goal that I want to go over is how we've supported Portrait of a Graduate and its role in innovation. So a little bit of context before this particular section. We, in order to get a handle on how innovation was related to our efforts in Portrait of a Graduate, we decided to survey all district staff. But keep in mind that at the time of this survey, the survey went out, I want to say November. Our Portrait of a Graduate was very much in its infancy stage. We were just at that stage where we were getting feedback from some of our key community groups. So while we had an idea of some of the larger profile skills that we wanted to identify with students, the definition of those skills were still being finalized, and of course, there was a possibility that maybe those skills could have changed by the time Portrait of a Graduate was officially adopted. So, having said that, this year was more about information gathering and setting a baseline for our efforts in the Department of Innovation and Technology to see where we need to target work at each level, building, and grades moving forward. So as part of this survey, went district-wide to all staff. Around, I would say, 42% of teachers responded to this survey. And as an additional follow-up, which we'll talk about later on in the presentation, we also did form some focus groups to dive into some of the patterns we started to see as a result of the survey. So for the remainder of the presentation, we're going to kind of go into some of the patterns of that survey. So I'm not going to go over all of the numbers you see here on the screen, but I just do want to point out some general patterns that you see on the screen. So the larger the lighter the shade, that's where we want to be. That's the strongly agree. So the questions were, does being one-to-one in innovation support our Portrait of a Graduate skills? So we want to see greater numbers in those lighter shades of blue. And you'll see, just on first blush, there's a lot of light blue. And keep in mind, again, we are in the infancy stages of rolling out Portrait of a Graduate. So for not having, fully, diving deep and implementing Portrait of a Graduate, we're starting from a very good baseline currently. But some things I want to point out and possible areas that we might want to improve upon as we think about rolling out our Portrait of a Graduate work. The two upper skills of academic content, that would be producing academically excellent students and students who are also resilient. 75% of district staff agreed that our one-to-one initiative, our digital tools, and our innovative efforts support those two skills. Now, when you go a little bit down to the lower left of the slide, the other skills of problem solving, communication, and collaboration, while we still see a majority, it's less than obviously 75%. We're hovering around the 50%. And so what we can see come out of this particular relationship of one-to-one innovation, using digital tools, things like that, is that we feel that currently some staff see Chromebooks as a supplemental tool, even though they are helping greatly support the learning experience, right? Right now, there are a good number of staff that see Chromebooks as kind of like, when I have something to assign to students, they go on and use the Chromebook, or if they have to look something up, they go use the Chromebook. It's always a passive kind of thing. Like you go use that tool when you need that tool. Whereas we want them to get to the point of seeing Chromebooks, digital tools, innovative practices as more of active learning, that it just becomes a natural part of the learning environment and the learning experience. But what I have written in the middle here is this is where we expect our staff to be, right? This is the first true year that we're not only in person, but we're in person with one-to-one and have access to all these tools. So it's not necessarily a bad thing right now. It's just a natural progression as we work up and as we go on and do our Portrait of a Graduate work more purposefully throughout the years. And so I also want to dive into our FIT framework. And I want to just point out to the board that while FIT doesn't necessarily get called out specifically in our Vision 2026, it's very much represented in our strategic plan. If we keep in mind that our Portrait of a Graduate is very student-focused, that was purposefully done, right? Those skills have the student at the center of our work. Our FIT framework is more teacher-focused. Our FIT framework was always meant to be given to teachers to go ahead and create learning environments that would support all of those Portrait of a Graduate skills. So the FIT framework is definitely there, but it's something that's going to be used in the background to go ahead and support our Portrait of a Graduate efforts. So some things I want to point out regarding how our one-to-one initiative, our innovative practices, and our digital tools are going in our district from this survey. So 75% of staff agree that the model of Chromebook that we have given to students, and keep in mind that we have 3 different models. Elementary uses a different model than middle school, and high school uses a different model than both middle and elementary. So all of the things that teachers currently did before one-to-one, they were able to continue doing now that we were one-to-one. So we weren't taking anything away from them. 72%, also very high, is we've also empowered teachers to try new things. That's where we want to grow, and this is where we want to keep going. The whole purpose is that we want teachers to try new things, to take risks, and create learning environments that are conducive to learning and supporting Portrait of a Graduate skills. And then about 70% agreed that students having access to a device every day did have an advantage when it comes to learning. Now, some areas for work that I want to point out is that a little lower, but still very commendable. 63% said that students having a device improved my ability being the teacher's ability to provide timely feedback. And you'll notice that I broke these 2 particular metrics down by level, because you'll notice that at the elementary level, that's the lowest. So that's a particular area we're going to focus on next year, is how can we empower elementary teachers to see the tools that they have in order to provide timely feedback for students. The second one, students having a device allowed me, the teacher, to participate in the learning process with students in real time. Again, you see there that as you get up to high school, it does increase, but we do see lower levels at the middle school and elementary level. One thing I want to point out, a possible reason for why you might see the disparity from elementary to high school. The high schools have always, well, I shouldn't say always, but for a number of years have had an innovation and learning coordinator, myself being one of them. We were embedded in the high school and could work on these two skills in particular day in and day out. We had only one innovation and learning coordinator that was responsible for all of middle school and all of elementary school, a tough task for one person. So starting this year, we added another innovation and learning coach. And so now we can specifically target our elementary buildings and then also specifically target with that other innovation and learning coordinator our middle schools as well. The high schools also have kept their innovation and learning coaches as well. And so as we were going through the data, we decided to engage some focus groups to get a little bit of greater understanding about patterns that we saw in the data. And one of the areas that we wanted to gain greater understanding was, what is the student role in learning? As we now are one-to-one, as we're trying more innovative practices, as now we're trying to develop our portrait of a graduate. And so you'll see these three categories here. All three of those are represented in Portrait of a Graduate, but all three also presented themselves in our FIT framework as well. So how are we, as staff members, creating communicators? Some good celebrations that we heard from this focus group were, for example, students are using Flipgrid to record video of their learning, but what's unique about Flipgrid is that students can respond back with video themselves. So this not only practices that media literacy skill that we talked about earlier, but it also gets to some other literacies, visual literacy, which I'll mention when we get to creator. We also want to practice empowering students to use other means to communicate with their teacher other than face-to-face, right? While we always want to say, it's okay, you should be able to go up to a staff member and ask for help anytime you need it, but we know there's going to be times when the school day is over and a student needs help, and we need to empower them to know what are the steps when the school day is over, or maybe my teacher's not in front of me, how do I get the help that I need, right? So we talk about things like, how do we use comments on documents? Where do we go on Google Classroom to connect with teachers? And so we're trying to empower students to advocate for themselves and get the feedback they need when a teacher is not in front of them. We also know collaborating is a huge skill that we want to practice with students. Obviously, the first and foremost reason why we became a Google district is because Google Docs and Slides and the whole Google suite of tools has at its core the ability to collaborate in real time with one another. Another big focus group insight that we got is that we also are able to now practice with students the ability to collaborate with one another both asynchronously and synchronously. So think about the past year when we were in our hybrid schedule, particularly at the middle and high school levels. There were times when half the students were in person, half the students were online, but there still needed to be that collaborative environment. There still needed to be a sense of community. And think about the skill as students get older, right? If they find themselves on business teams or even a global team where there's time zones, right? You still have to collaborate on projects even though you might not be all together online at the same time. So here is a skill now that we're able to practice with students to teach them how to collaborate both asynchronously and synchronously. The last bit on this particular student role in learning, how we have creators in our classrooms. And at one-to-one, this focus group indicated allowed students a variety of ways to showcase their learning. And one that I want to point out in particular is video creation. So another literacy that I didn't mention is visual literacy. It's a very big skill for students to have now, to be able to summarize their learning and make a message in a visual format. So I wouldn't say long gone are the days, but it's less common now to produce paragraphs upon paragraphs of text, right? We want to make good writers, but we also want to make sure we're also creating creators who can create a message in more visual formats, especially video, because like, as I said, students are going to YouTube first and foremost to get information. So following that, another section of the survey talked about usage rates at each level. So in the next 3 slides, I'm not going to go over each of the numbers on these slides, but I broke it down for you by level, elementary, middle, and high. The first 2 questions are pretty straightforward. Now that we're one-to-one, how often do you use technology and digital tools during class time? And then how often do you use it outside of class? We see pretty high numbers all across the board for those first 2 ones. Where we really want to focus our innovative efforts are all those other options. And these all come through a mixture of the FIT framework and some of our Vision 2026 goals. So do you use technology, Chromebooks, and innovative practices for differentiation, for assessment, for blended learning, for completing projects, for real-world problem solving, things like that? What we saw is different levels had different strengths for those particular items. So that led us to have a conversation of what types of learning experiences are people using Chromebooks, digital tools, and innovative practices to support. And we pulled out 3 different categories we wanted to follow up with focus groups on. And those were active learning opportunities, blended learning opportunities, and opportunities for differentiation. And as we saw the numbers between the levels, we asked ourselves 2 questions. Is the reason that we see a discrepancy between levels of these 3 things because there's not a uniform understanding of what active learning is, what blended learning is, and what differentiation is? Or is it just they need help in implementing it with digital tools, with Chromebooks, with innovative practices? So what we found was it's a little bit of both. So for active learning, we saw at some levels that active learning was interpreted as students are now doing something with a Chromebook, right? I have an activity, students go and do whatever it is now on a Chromebook. Where we want to get all levels to is that not only are students using technology to, possibly enrich an activity, but students actually understand why they're using the technology for the activity, right? They have to understand that the reason why Miss So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so gave us this activity on a Chromebook or with a tool is because it really is integral to a skill that I need to practice or the activity itself. So we really want students to take a central role in that learning process. And those teachers who had that strong understanding of active learning understood that definition, and I put some examples of how they did that using 2 particular tools, again, our Google products and Flipgrid. Now, really interesting too was our blended learning. So as part of Vision 2026, you'll see that one of the goals of Vision 2026 is to increase blended learning opportunities. When we looked at the data, we saw that K through 8 said that they were doing way more blended learning than high school, which kind of scratched my head because blended learning at this point only existed at the high school. So how was it that K through 8 said that they were doing more blended learning than high school? So as a matter of talking to focus groups, we saw that there was kind of maybe a misunderstanding, but what is blended learning? That we might need to sit down and come up with an operational definition that's agreed upon by all levels of what we mean by blended learning. And kind of the definition that we've used at the high school level is that blended learning is any type of learning where students have a choice, time, place, and options for the path that they're taking in their learning. So the reason why high school had said that they had it less than K through 8 was because blended learning was still in the pilot phase at the high school level. And they are now expanding their offerings for next year, but blended learning was more so an operational understanding. Differentiation was not, I think every level understood what differentiation is. That's something we've had plenty of experience on, but really that was more of an implementation issue. So trying to help staff understand, particularly at the elementary level, how can we use innovative practices, technology, Chromebooks, digital tools to differentiate and tailor instruction to meet the needs of individual groups of students. Last thing I want to touch upon is we've covered the student role in learning, the types of learning environments that we're creating. Now, what's the teacher role in this innovation piece? What are they kind of responsible for? So as we engaged our focus groups, we pulled out 3 items that we wanted to dive a little more deeply with. So the 3 that we picked out here are related to this slide right here. Timely feedback and the ability to be an active, simultaneous partner in the learning process. Because we saw that those 2 in particular had the biggest discrepancy between the levels. So as we drilled down a little bit further, we noticed that there does need to be some work at different levels to have students or to allow teachers to give students more timely feedback. Right now we see that there's kind of a more traditional sense of feedback where I assign something, the student does it, I have to wait for the student to hand it back in, then I grade it, and then I leave some comments, then I give it back to the student, and it just really bogs the process down, right? So we want to work with teachers to actually give them the ability to leave feedback while the learning is happening, and that goes to that middle section there, real-time learning, right? So what kinds of learning environment experiences and skills can we help teach our teachers that they're involved in the learning process? And the way that they're involved in the learning process is by leaving that timely feedback and progress monitoring the student as they're doing the work. Teachers aren't waiting for things to come back. They're watching things be completed in real time and guiding the students in real time as that work is happening. So the hope here is that you catch opportunities to improve upon learning, and you catch misunderstandings a lot sooner, and then you can go ahead and actually have that learning acceleration that Ms. Murphy had talked about, and not having to wait for this kind of back and forth of assigning work, waiting for it back, grading it, giving it back, so on and so forth. The last section is the productive struggle, right? So there wasn't a clear consensus by teachers how to approach productive struggle they all understood that we have to challenge students, right? But how do we pick that sweet spot of scaffolding learning that's appropriate for students, right? Again, we want to get students to the point where they know where to go get information, where they're empowered to go ask for help, and that they know that when they're presented a problem, what are the steps they need to do to solve the problem, right? So sometimes we're kind of apt to want to give students all the information. We want to give them all the documents they need, all the videos they need, all the information they need, and have very detailed outlines of plans, but sometimes that's probably not best for students, right? We want to give them that sense of it's okay to struggle, right? Learning is kind of messy, right? But we need to work with staff to understand where that sweet spot is, right? Because we don't want them to give up on students, but we don't want them to, kind of guide their learning too much that when they're presented with new novel situations that the students kind of throw their hands up and are like, I don't know what to do now. So next steps. So as a result of the survey, remember, again, we're just trying to set a baseline since Porch for Graduate hadn't been settled yet. Vision 2026 hasn't been formally adopted yet. So we want to continue to track the progress of our innovative practices that we outlined here. We want to continue to utilize our new innovation and learning coordinators specifically at the elementary level. We think that there's a lot of opportunity there to work with our elementary folks. We want to also consolidate our understanding of key terms and messaging at all levels. I think that there are parts of our Vision 2026 that we're going to really point out and make sure that not only the community understands, but our staff also understands what some of these words and practices mean. But more importantly, we also want to provide actionable examples of what innovation looks like in our strategic plan and our Porch of a Graduate work. A big goal of mine is not just to have innovation, some fluff word that we're saying we're innovative, right? That there's actual instructional practices behind that work. And so I know we will be looking at our Vision 2026 shortly here, but I just wanted to point out for the board some specific places in our Vision 2026 strategic work document where innovation is specifically called out. So I won't read each of them one by one, but I have pointed out where in Vision 2026 we do see opportunities for more innovative practices. With that, any questions, comments? I will leave it open for those now.
Questions or comments for Mr. Spencer? Mr. Paulson?
No, I get to go first this time.
Yep.
First off, I fully support the focus on modern literacy. I mean, I think we see that all the time. We feel it. Super important. I worry that only introducing that at the sophomore English might be a little bit too late. So I'm curious if there's a way in the future to maybe connect that to some kind of middle school level experience. I know we have a class in there, but maybe to connect those two together might be.
Yeah, we actually talked about revisiting some of our digital electives at the middle school level to work in some of those media literacy skills, but also realizing that there's also opportunities at all levels to practice those literacies without a dedicated unit of study for it, right? We can find ways to incorporate it into content as well.
Yeah. Second, I have two more comments. One, first off, when you were talking about the creator, totally embrace and support this whole idea of communicating graphically. A graphic profession as an architect, I see it all the time that it's a great skill that our students need to learn how to use to convey ideas, to make points using graphics rather than just a bunch of words on a screen. And then finally, for me, as I look to the future, I want to put a little bit of different lens on the word innovation. It's a very tricky word. When I think about innovative learning, I'm thinking about learning by making and doing. I'm thinking about STEM or STEAM programs, project-based learning. We talked about blended learning, experiential learning. I think about CTE and career pathways. So, from that side of innovation, I want to really ask our team to really reach out and see what others are doing. Think big, think much bigger. Don't be afraid to come back to us with some big, bold ideas to give our students unique experiences that maybe don't necessarily center on a device or how they're using a device. So that's something that I'd love to see continuing the conversation down the road.
Absolutely.
I just want to agree with you. That was going to be my one big comment was around that word innovation that I was going to kind of ask, are we only talking about technological innovation? Because I think there's so many different ways to do, and I know you're the director of technology. So, and I understand that's what you're talking about here, but I think you said it perfectly, that I think innovation should be a much broader term in our district and the things that we do.
Yeah, and if I could point out one thing, you know, the motto of our department is mindsets before things. So we've got the stuff, like we've gotten that part taken care of. Now, like we've said, now we got to talk about the mindsets, the experiences that we're creating for students and our staff. So absolutely.
I mean, all of this work is fantastic.
Yeah.
So I'm not
Yeah.
discounting any of that. I think this is really important that we take a deep dive and look at how all of our different levels are using the devices now that we're here with one-to-one, and what that all means and how we're evaluating the programs that are used with the device. So I greatly appreciate all of this. I didn't mean to skip to the last one and focus on one word. I didn't mean it that way at all. But,
No, all good.
but no, I really appreciate the work.
Thank you.
I'm going to follow up with that. I'm concerned that there wouldn't be felt by teachers a pressure to use the device. Like I think, you know, as Brad said, there's ways to innovate without necessarily using the device, and some of the focus here seems so device-driven. I don't know if there's bringing curriculum and balance.
Yeah, so as we define innovation for our staff earlier in the year, I always define innovation very broadly as trying something new or improving upon something that we've always done. So there never was a focus on technology to do that. We hope that as teachers see what technology can do, they would realize that they should maybe want to incorporate that as part of their natural teaching experience, but there's never a pressure of, all right, use it, right? So it's more conjunction, like I'll point out our kindergarten teachers. So our kindergarten teachers have found themselves that they really didn't see the need for Chromebooks in the classroom at that age level, and so we really sat down and had some focus groups with kindergarten teachers and said, why do you think this? And it came down to, well, we don't think that necessarily kindergartners need them every day, but we would also really like something with touch, because it's really important for kindergartners to have tactile experiences when moving things around. So what we're doing now is we're experimenting on how can we get kindergartners a touchscreen Chromebook instead. So they'll have class sets and have different kinds of stations in their room versus a one-to-one type of environment. So.
Going back to something you said at the beginning, we hope that teachers will want to, you know, through this process they will want to use it, but I don't know, I still struggle with, is that my hope? Like having children who suddenly ended up with technology in our home last year, 2 years ago. My hope actually would be that we could shelf it a little more. So those kindergarten teachers who want to have that tactile experience, I don't want it to be on a device. Like, I mean, I agree this is great work and it's keeping up with where we are in society and times, but I don't know that I personally want it to be something like, I want teachers to, I want them to know what's available and like if something can help and incorporate into your curriculum, but it's difficult. And I may be in the minority of parents and board members. They have so much access to it in other realms that, but then, so I have a question.
Yep.
Kind of doesn't go along with that. Why do we think that only 42% of the staff filled out the survey?
I think naturally when you send out a survey to the whole district, between 40 and 50 is kind of an expected kind of return rate on it.
I guess maybe I shouldn't have said why. I think it's hard to look at the data saying 75%, but if it's 75% of 42%, then it's like 28, 29%. So I guess I'm not sure what progress we want to see, or like, are we using these as data points?
I would say 42% is still representative. I think there was enough, if you look at the one slide that broke it down by level, I think there was a representative group from each level that I think we could extrapolate sufficiently for goals.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this.
Sure. Yeah.
Other questions or comments?
I have just a quick research question following on. The focus groups, I think I just heard you say it, well, almost heard you say it, was just with teachers, not with students?
This year, we just focused on teachers. So in the future, we can follow up with students now that they've had a little bit of experience. Like since this was their first year, like really, in a one-to-one environment, kind of introducing all these kind of things, we decided to start with teachers, and then we'll follow up with students.
And maybe parents in the
Mhm.
future?
I have a couple things.
Sure.
I'm going to piggyback on what Brad had mentioned. I would love to see this expand into more than just high school sophomore English. I know that the mandate is written for high school in particular, but I'd like to see it go down even further. Even in high school, though, and I understand there's that. We don't want to take away any more instructional time from content areas, but we do have access and we do have opportunities throughout the day. I just think things like, I've attended the last few years at the Illinois Association of School Boards when there's presentations on, sextortion and how it's just growing and growing and growing. And I feel there's a responsibility on our part as well as we put devices in kids' hands, that we are starting even at a young age. I have the opportunity to go into school districts all over this area and work in this area, and specifically in this area, and I can tell you that there are fifth graders, fourth graders, that they are out there. They are on so many social media platforms. Those are constantly changing. I would like just for that we are aware of situations and common situations that students are in, just to be able to help them, even if it's how to talk to a trusted adult about what it is that they've experienced, so even simple like that. So I would love to see that.
Absolutely.
As well. One more comment I had. I really like the ways to showcase their learning in the creator piece. I think one of the pieces that is out there right now, and I know that we're even doing it in recruiting for teachers, is requiring video. Colleges are now moving from the opportunity of an essay to a video, and I just think that more experience we can give, especially at the high school level, as they're entering workforce, entering college, that they have that opportunity. So I'm really glad to see
Absolutely.
that's there.
First, can I add one thing that you remind me of? First, I do like the idea of practicing video interviews and those skills. And my middle schooler is doing a podcast, which is part of a national competition. I think that's kind of neat. There is a digital literacy class at the middle school level currently, correct? And I think it's a quarter level class at the sixth grade level?
Mhm.
Okay. Just wanted to, maybe it could come down to elementary, but at least there is something in sixth grade.
Thank you, Mr. Spencer. Thank you. Student learning feature. Since we've got a lot of it. Well, I don't know. I know this. I just don't know how much time we're. Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to provide you with an update on student learning. Inside of your green folders, there is a memo that I am going to be providing you an overview about. And this is all about our FastBridge assessment system that a committee of teachers selected to utilize starting next year as our interim assessment. You may remember at our last board meeting, we talked about the Vision 2026 strategy of designing and implementing a balanced assessment system. And in a balanced assessment system, there really are three types of assessments. There's classroom assessments. Mr. Spencer just spoke to that. There's interim assessments. And then there's evaluative or summative assessments. We're talking tonight about interim assessments. And that's what we're going to be using FastBridge for. FastBridge has assessments for reading and math. At 2nd through 8th grade, that assessment is adaptive. What that means is it adjusts to the student's ability while they're taking the test. It's not restricted just to their grade level content. At the kindergarten and 1st grade level, that test is administered one-on-one, and it evaluates early reading and early math skills. It is administered 3 times a year, and that's what makes it our interim assessment. We would be giving that assessment in the fall, in the winter, in the spring. We have been using FastBridge since 2018 as our progress monitoring system, and so we have used that to monitor the progress of our students that are enrolled in our intervention programs. There are multiple ways that our schools will be using this data. First and foremost, it will assist us in identifying the students who need support beyond Tier 1. And Tier 1 again means the classroom instruction. It's the instruction all students receive. It will allow us to evaluate program impact. It'll allow us to identify what a student knows and what concepts a teacher must focus on to ensure that there's grade level performance. And most importantly, it will allow us to measure both student achievement and growth over time, and the system allows us to dive deeper into that performance, the achievement, and the growth by demographic groups. Our goal is to make this data available to our parents. That's a piece of feedback that we have received and we want to respond to. So our team is going to be working to make that data available in parent view after each administration. And finally, as a Board of Education, you will receive those updates as well. You will see the results of the spring administration yearly, and that will also be reported on our district dashboard. At this time, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions or comments for Mrs. Murphy? Mr. Long?
So all of the assessments are one-on-one?
The only assessments that are one-on-one are the ones that are administered in kindergarten and first grade for reading and math. For each of those assessments, for reading, it would take about 5 minutes a student, and for math, it would take about 5 minutes a student. The other assessments are administered on the computer, and so all students in the class would be taking that at the same time.
Okay. And how long are those tests?
At grades 2 through 8, it could take between an estimated amount of 30 to 35 minutes per subject area.
Okay. Because that, just when I first read it and saw 3 times a year, I'm like, that's a lot of time, but it's not that much time, especially with what it's being used for and the result of it. So it's not like a half-day test.
Correct. I will say too, when the committee went through the process of evaluating different assessments, the amount of time that the assessment would take with the kind of data we received was a main component for our decision making.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments for Mrs. Murphy? Thank you. Dr. Schuler, next up is Vision 2026 Strategic Plan.
Yeah, so actually in your packet, I'm gonna go quickly rather than go through a full set of slides because I've realized that we're getting late. Our goal this evening under strategic plan was actually just bring you an update to our draft of the plan. So in your green packet, you do have a couple of slides that just remind you of how we got to our strategic plan. Again, we worked in the development for a couple of months leading up to March, April timeframe. We've been out in front of the staff in each of our buildings. We hosted a couple of open community sessions, went to some of our strategic partners to solicit their feedback and have woven the feedback into some updates to the Vision 2026 chart. Again, my ask of you is to take this with you, the chart, and just kind of look it over one more time. This has got some adjustments from when you likely first saw it in whatever committee we distributed this to you in. And again, just a reminder that the strategy tactical chart that you have in your folders will correspond with the specific dashboard measurable target outcomes. So for each of the strategies, learning acceleration as an example, as we reviewed at your last committee of the whole meeting, there's a very specific set of measurable objectives that sit underneath that. Again, you just heard part of that a couple seconds ago with the FastBridge element. So certainly I can entertain any feedback, but I guess my ask of you would be to take this with you, give it one more final look and come prepared in June to kind of offer any final feedback or even in advance of that meeting. So let us know if you have any.
Thank you. Anything right now? I know we're tasked to take that with us, but, okay. Attached to the agenda is the monthly financial reports, the FOIA report, the board communication log, the Citizens Advisory Committee. Next up is reports from board members, their board committee reports. Social emotional learning was attached. Any other information regarding board committee? Okay, other reports from board members?
I just have one comment. I had an opportunity to volunteer at the post-prom event for Wheaton North, and I just want to emphasize how cool I think that event is, because the whole intent is there's a limited period of time that the kids can check in from when prom ends to when they can get in, and they have to stay there till the end, or they either have to text their parents or one of the volunteers text their parents. So the whole thing is keeping the kids safe, keeping them from doing things we don't want our 17 and 18-year-olds doing, and a lot of great volunteers. But I just think it's a really cool event focused on keeping the kids, safe and off the street.
It's a wonderful opportunity. I know I've had the chance to volunteer at that as well, but it's many community groups who help sponsor that financially as well. To be able to have that, it's just it's so much work. It's something they work all year long on doing.
Thanks.
Other questions or comments from board members in other reports? I'm sorry. Dr. Yeboah.
I have one. I would like to begin by thanking every District 200 teacher, support staff, director, and administrator for educating our children, and in doing so, making the world a better place. I would like to thank my father, who suggested that the combination of my education, experiences, gifts, and talents could be helpful for listening and for making good decisions on behalf of our community for public education. I would like to thank Erica and Jason, Brian, Melissa, Chris, Charlie, Jeff, Diana, for your leadership, integrity, and vision. I would like to thank Susan, Angela, Rob, Chris, Dave, and Brad for your service. Working with you has been one of the greatest joys of my life. You're good people. Finally, I would like to thank the District 200 community for entrusting the governance of the education and well-being of our children to me, and for your continuous outpouring of support. It has been my desire to serve faithfully and to serve well. There's an Asante Adinkra symbol called Inchinchim that symbolizes toughness, adaptability, determination, and service to others. In its corresponding Akan proverb, it means the path of life is full of twists and turns. Life has taken me on an unexpected turn when I was presented with an out-of-state opportunity to mentor teachers and collaborate with school leaders in diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. I accepted the offer, and I look forward to returning full-time to the K-12 learning space, which I love. This opportunity aligns closely with my personal and professional commitments to the quality of education of all children, commitments I hope I have upheld with humility and conviction this past year. I'm sad to say that I will conclude my board service on June 30th, but the children and families of this community will remain dear to my heart. I only ask is that we carry on through life's twists and turns ahead, that we uphold even across the deepest fears and widest divides the dignity and humanity of each person, that we embrace dialogue, listening, and personal human connection, and that we model for our children what lifelong learning looks like for the good of society and for the benefit of our neighbor. Thank you again for the opportunity. I'm deeply grateful.
Thank you, Dr. Yeboah. So as you mentioned, June 30th is when you're going to tender your resignation from the board to pursue this new opportunity. So board members will have the opportunity in June to start talking about application process and what the next steps are. We do have policy that we will use as our reference and our guide, through this process. Dr. Bo, we're not saying goodbye to you yet. We have, you still have 6 weeks or so. that are, yeah. So thank you. Okay. Any topics for further discussion, board members? All right, next regular board meeting is June 15th, 2022, here at Hubble. We don't have any announcements. We do have 2 items we're moving into closed session for. So I move to adjourn to closed session pursuant to the Illinois Open Meetings Act, exemptions 5 ILCS 120/2, subparagraph C, subparagraph 1, and 5 ILCS 120/2, subparagraph C, subparagraph 10. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Hanlon. Mrs. Hutchinson, will you call the roll? Yes.
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 Okay, there will be no action expected following the closed session. Our meeting is adjourned to closed session.